Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
We're talking about the Spirit of Volvo, 50 reasons why we love them. We're celebrating the 98th anniversary of the production of the very first Volvo. It's a glorious hardback celebrating almost 100 years of the brand's exceptional worldwide reputation. Delighted to say I am joined by the author of The Spirit of Volvo, by Vaughan Grylls. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning to you, sir. How are you?
I'm very well. Do we find you, I don't know, in a log cabin somewhere on the outskirts of Stockholm, with a fleet of Volvos gleaming in the summer sunshine?
Well, the nearest I've got to Scandinavia is that my family on my mother's side did come from Denmark. I'm afraid that's as nearest I can get to that part of the world. I'm in Kent at the moment.
Right, well, fair enough. Probably once that's the Danelaw or something like that. Now, yeah. Volvo. You can kind of understand why, and I speak to an awful lot of authors they've written about Ferrari, Lamborghini, Aston Martin. Volvos have been with us and for 98 years, and people will think, okay, chunky, very safety conscious, unexceptional. Your book, of course, spins that on its head, Vaughan.
Yes, it does. It's true that they started with safety in mind. One of the few car makers who started like that, and also with being very exact about producing, because they produced ball bearings which had to be absolutely accurate. And ball bearing actually either works or it doesn't work, had to be clean environment and so on, and really obsessively perfect. And in fact, that DNA passed into Volvo themselves, which is one of the reasons they were so successful, particularly in the United States, where they're sold so many.
My first question there, is there a Mr. Volvo? Is that a generic name? Is it a family? Where does Volvo come from?
Well, it just means it's a Latin for I roll, hence the ball bearing. I roll. That was it.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's actually Latin rather than sort of sweet, Volvo means chunky car in Swedish or something like that.
It is indeed.
Wow.
Appeals to the intellectual.
So almost 100 years. So that's 1926, 27 almost. What was the first sort of Volvo then, and why did Sweden did it have a motor industry per se? I mean, we think Saab, don't we? I suppose is the other Swedish car manufacturer. But what was? Well,
Saab didn't come on the scene until after World War II.
Right.
So they're babies at it, because they're mostly aircraft manufacturer. They had sex on their side because of their image with making instead of ball bearings, they made aeroplanes, fighter planes. But Volvo started. They were the first proper manufacturer of cars. And they started with something called the Jacob, just named after St. Jacob's Day on the 25th of August, 1926. So it's a rather sort of religious start to things.
So is it a case with, obviously in the States you've had the Model T that has transformed car ownership, and in the UK you've got all those little garage manufacturers, springing up and everything. Sweden is because of presumably trying to import that sort of stuff from, or even from France with the French motor industry would be a little bit expensive. So is that one of the reasons they want to have their homegrown sort of car industry?
Yes, it was. I mean, they had the expertise, and they didn't want to have to pay for the import of foreign cars. And in fact, for the first part of their life, right until the beginnings of the end of the Second World War, they were mostly sold within Sweden. They were a very sort of domestic product. They weren't really imported.
Presumably, if because Sweden, I mean, and obviously now it's summer in Sweden, but there is somewhat of a climate issue, isn't there, with Sweden? Because obviously, when winter comes, it is a challenging environment.
It is, and that's why they went, as Saab did also, on not breaking down and being as tough as old boots. But they actually, Volvo, absolutely, essentially built to go through any weather climate at all. And that's one of the reasons they were so popular in North America, because of the extremes of climate there.
Presumably, it was relatively basic. I mean, if you've got to go through the extremes of climate, you don't want little bits and pieces that can either freeze over, fall off, or not be replaced easily. If you do break down somewhere just south of the tundra, you're going to want to be able to fix it within the next couple of hours. Otherwise, you could be into a very sort of interesting situation.
Absolutely. And they always say that, one of the most welcome sights when you've broken down in the middle of a desert or in the tundra or wherever is the approach of a Volvo police car.
So, I mean, what that takes us through to the 30s, obviously, and the 40s, it's because Sweden is not neutral in the Second World War. So when does Volvo start to get a worldwide impact, if you like, and do they sort of change their strategy and their design during the 50s for the export market?
Yeah, they did. They actually looked at American cars of the style of the late 40s and 50s, and they started to import something called the PV444 in about 1954, and they sold it on the basis that it was not only cheaper to run than an American car, but it's much more reliable. And if you climbed in one, you won't buy another car.
So when does Volvo sort of really take off? I mean, I'm thinking iconic Volvos, and the first one that I think of is the P120, which is a good. When does that come out? Presumably it's in the 50s or something like that.
Yes, that was the last one styled a little bit on an American-style car, my favourite model, actually. And they sold throughout the 1960s. They were the car of choice for Volvo nuts. And they were built like a tank. Some say they drove like one, but the sporty ones didn't.
And then we get to, talking about sporty, of course, Volvo really takes off. And I think I had one when I was about 8, not to drive, but, a Matchbox or a Dinky toy or whatever. And it's, of course, it's the Saint, isn't it? It is the car driven by the Saint. And this is a sporty Volvo at the time must have seemed, in a world that had E-types and all sorts of Italian manufacturers coming out with these sleek, beautiful models. Volvo decided to have a crack with, was it Simon Templar, the Saint? What was he driving? Was it the P180, is it, or something?
The 1800S.
Yeah, right, yeah.
He did, and in fact, it's interesting, Giles, because you brought in why I was interested in Volvos, and it's quite by chance, because at the time it was the 60s, and I drove a Beetle. I was at university at art school, and my girlfriend in London at the time went off with somebody else. And I said, "What do you see in him? I've got a car to drive around in." And she said, "Well, so is he." I said, "Yeah, but he's just an accountant. I'm an artist." And she says, "Yes, but he's got this sporty car." I said, "What is it?" She said, "I don't know what it's called. I think the Saint drives it." I thought, damn. What does the P1800S, the bloody Saint got? What has that got against me driving a Beetle? And that's what happened, you see. I was upstaged.
Yeah, by
a Volvo, believe it or not.
Well, no, I mean, I can't, it is a very sexy car, the Saint drives one, and it's individual, whilst everybody else is in Aston Martins or Volkswagen Beetles, we're everywhere and they still are. So, so that was a mark. But it must have been a brave call by Volvo management to go for that one, because they were known as being dependable, as you said, police.
Boring, yes, yes. Yeah, to use the B word. But the 1800S went down a storm in America, particularly as Volvo are rather naughty in their advertising, because the idea of a European sports car to Americans at the time was like an Italian one or the E-type Jaguar, that sort of thing. And in their advertising, they said, this sports car actually doesn't mind being driven hard. It's not just to look at.
If you grew up if you were a school kid in the 70s, as I was, Volvo estates, every car park, everywhere the kids came to pick up, there was a 240 estate. I mean, they were just everywhere, weren't they?
Yeah, the antique owners special. Yeah, that was it. And if anybody who ran an antique business had one of those things. That's what they had to have. And also families and things like that. But, they were capacious, and they were the first cars really designed on the Bauhaus principle of form following function, because they maximised the space inside against the length of the car. So you got more space in a Volvo estate than you did in a great American Yank tank.
Because hence the antiquity is because you could put a grandfather clock in there and have no trouble.
Yeah, in the book, I've got a picture of one in a rally sports car, and I said, is that a sofa in the back as it's tearing around the corner? It looks a bit like one.
Now, it's interesting you say motorsport because obviously Volvo, Sweden, rallying. I mean, this was going to be one of the big things, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And they would drive through hell and high water. And that was the main thing, that a Volvo could charge in and out of, well, it could charge in, but it also could charge out of any sort of very strong climate. Yeah.
And also, of course, the other thing is the fact I remember in the heydays of the BTCC, the British Touring Car Championship, when it was on BBC, and it was like Will Hoy, Alan Menu, all the big manufacturers were there, and Frank Bieler in an Audi and all that sort of thing. But Volvo turned up and they bought an estate with them. They had 2 estate cars running. That's
right, exactly, which is sort of like a tongue in cheek, but again, it's part of Volvo's advertising that they did. They were tongue-in-cheek, and they appealed, I think, to people who thought for themselves. That was their market, and still is in a way.
One of the things as well. They were damn fast, but we talk about the durability and the toughness, but they were so ahead of the curve when it came to novel things like rigid structures and crash testing and side impacts, because in the 70s, and I think of some of the cars that we were all shuttled around with, some of them now would absolutely be they were coffin shaped to fit around you, and would buckle under if a large housefly hit you.
You're absolutely right. I mean, they were the first company really at motor shows in America and in Britain and elsewhere to actually show on their stand a crashed Volvo, a car that had been driven into a brick wall at 50 miles an hour, and what the result was. They were brave enough to do that. And then, of course, people thought, oh, that's terrible, that won't sell a car. Actually, it did.
What's the? I was just going to say, do they still do the? Is it the moose test in Sweden? Do you know what the moose test is, where they have to?
Yes, it's supposed to. I don't know if it's, a moose wanders into it. I mean, I think it's Saab's part of that. A moose wanders around the corner, and you're tearing your Saab, on some mountain road in Sweden or something, and you hit a moose, and you get out and walk away, and the moose doesn't. If
you want to sell cars, you need celebrity endorsements, and Volvo didn't get, I don't know, ABBA or Roxette or something, or some Swedish beefcake, but Jeremy Clarkson and Top Gear at the time, but this is the mid-90s, it's the most watched program by both car lovers and also people who enjoy it. When the old Top Gear used to be very, very dry indeed, but this was a lot of chaos. But Clarkson had, what is it, the 850 series?
He had an 850. He said, I think he called it, it would do 149 miles an hour. And he said something like that. What did he say it was? He said it was something like a rocket, not a rocket coffin, a rocket something or other. But it was he actually rated that car. He said it was when he had a family, when he first wife. That's what they drove. This great big fastest Volvo they made at the time, and that was the one that he raved about.
How does Volvo sort of measure up when it comes to doing executive cars? I'm talking about taking on Merc, BMW, newly branded Jaguar, etc. I mean, do they produce executive cars as well? Are they sort of and then we get into the SUV market, which you would think for Volvo is a natural progression with their history.
Yeah, it is. Well, what happened there was that they were the company who made trucks and things sold Volvo, and they sold it to Ford. And Ford didn't know what to do with it. And then they thought, we're going to put this into our luxury division alongside Aston Martin and these the makes that they bought. And they did that. And, of course, that meant that Volvo had to go up market. So it is now head-to-head with Audi and BMW and Mercedes, the big German manufacturers. And, in fact, they did then they were appealing to a luxury market as well as to people who are just buying a car using their common sense.
And with modern technology, I mean, obviously now they've got the backing of the big boys, as it were. I mean, as Volvo, the Scandinavians obviously are famously environmentally friendly. So electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, Volvo involved with that, leading the field?
Well, you see, again, they struck lucky there because they were bought by Geely in China. Well, Geely were leading. They did all their research in Silicon Valley, and they introduced a car called the Polestar, which was a racing car, really, to start with, which is all electric. And that DNA went into Volvo, so that Volvo and Polestar are sister companies. Polestar are made in China, although the Volvo is also made in China. Got a huge manufacturing plant in Shanghai, and of course, overseas sales for European cars has switched in volume from the United States to China, where it is now. Now, the problem is that the Chinese are having a problem, particularly with the present American government, about importing Chinese cars into the US. But you see, Volvo, very cleverly, don't have that problem because they are a European car, a European manufacturer. So their stuff is being imported into the US, although they're Chinese owned. They're very clever, and of course, also they're ahead in electric technology because of the Polestar research. So
when it comes to writing 50 reasons that we love Volvo, you've got everything from the headlights to the heritage. So how do you sort of narrow it down? And the other thing I like about this, it gives you a look at sort of the factory and Volvo people, and also, in law enforcement, because it is absolutely, I mean, most of us in the UK will look at a police Volvo coming up the M25 and go, all right, get out of the way. More so than they did, it's been more dependable than the Cosworth Sierra, for example.
Well, that's true. You see, when writing a book like that, I mean, I took a leaf in a way, I think, and I have done with the other books I've written on cars in the same series, out of Top Gear you mentioned, because you've got to write it slightly tongue-in-cheek. You've got to remember that it's got to be entertaining because cars are driven by people. So therefore, it's no good being dry and sort of too technical. In fact, I say that right at the beginning. You've got to say, how do you write this book? How do you do this thing? From the point of view who somebody who's reading it or in TV terms watching it, how is it they relate to it every day? You've got to be fun. It's got to be fun.
How Jasper Carrot famously said, I'm not aware of Jasper Carrot, but he famously said you cannot turn the lights off in a Volvo, and he had this whole sketch about the lights are on, the lights are on, the lights are on, and everybody else would crash because they were saying your light. Can you actually turn the lights off on a Volvo?
No, you can't, and you couldn't on a Saab either. And the reason, and it's funny you should say that, because basically the lights came on automatically when it was dark. Well, it's dark most of the time in Sweden, isn't it? So, therefore, that's why they were on. And of course, Canadians like that because it's dark a lot of the time there as well. And so the whole idea about lights being on is despite Jasper Carrot's joke, it's no longer a joke because you only have to drive out in your own car. I mean, I've got old classic cars. You drive out, I have to switch the lights on because it's getting a bit dark. It might be raining above or dark, and it suddenly gets dark in the middle of the day. You see all the cars coming out with the lights on because they've all got automatic lighting. Cars have now. In other words, everybody has followed what Volvo did.
If you live in southern Spain, as I do, when we're full of tourists. And the roads make Death Race 2000 look like a kindergarten. You have your lights on all the time. You might as well have your indicators. And I would rather put a guy out the front with a red flag as well, because it is mayhem out there at the moment.
If I've driven in southern Spain, I know what it's like. I mean, you may as well have your flashes on as well, I think. I would.
So you said you've written about. You've said you've written. This is a series. So the other books. What are the other books in the series that you've written, and how does the Volvo compare then?
Well, the first one was Saab, and then I did BMW, and then I did VW, Volkswagen. Then I've done Volvo, and now I've just completed Mercedes.
Ooh, okay.
But these are all cars. And I only write about cars I love, or cars I own, or both, or cars I've got classics of. I've got a few. My wife keeps saying, you should sell some of these classics, you've got too many cars. I said, well, I like to I like to drive them. There's something about driving the old cars, whether it's an old Volvo, whatever it is, that brings back. This is why old people like me like old classic cars, especially when they've been done up, because they can't. They can make them perfect. Not that I do, because they can't make themselves perfect anymore. That's why people with white hair drive around in old classic cars.
That is brilliant, Vaughan. I had never thought about that. You have completely blown. So the next time I'm at Goodwood, I'll go, that's the reason why.
That's the reason. You've got it. You got it, Giles.
What are you hoping that people will take from the book, The Spirit of Volvo? That it's not, again, you can't turn the lights off, but there's much more to Volvo than just boxy and safe.
Well, I hope it's a compelling story for them to read. I think it is. It was for me writing it, but it's also fun as well. As I said, it's fun to read it, and it will bring a few chuckles.
The book is called The Spirit of Volvo, 50 Reasons Why We Love Them. It's out on the 15th, it's out on Friday, isn't it, the book?
It is, yeah.
And you can order it, though. You can pre-order it by going to the link on our own virtual bookstore. You will see this front cover, this beautiful front cover in Swedish blue, and click on the link and it will pre-order for you and it'll be winging its way to you. Vaughan, do you do social media? Is there a website that you have? Can people contact you any other way?
Yeah, there is. I've got a big Facebook following. You put Vaughan Grylls in there, you'll find me, and on Instagram. And in fact, I will put some plugs up there for the book.
Well, the book is called The Spirit of Volvo. I'm going to get you back on when we talk about the Mercedes, because I think that will be more fun than when
it was an interesting one to write. Very interesting. Challenging in a way.
Yes.
I'm not going into that now.
Let's not go into that now because we're talking about nice and neutral with the Swedes, okay? Let's not get on to 1930s. As you can tell, I'm a bit of a petrol head, Vaughan, and I will get you back on to talk about the Mercedes. This book is called this book is called Spirit of Volvo, 50 Reasons Why We Love Them. It's by Vaughan Grylls. You can pre-order it on our own virtual bookstore and go forth and find him online. Vaughan, it's been an absolute pleasure for a petrol head like me to speak to you.
And it was for me too.